in Ireland, we have a saying called Mícheál féin, scéal gach duine. Mícheál féin, scéal gach duine. My story is everyone's story. My story is everybody's story.
Wow.
So we're all the same. So that is neither egotistical nor overly humble. That's just a fact. I've found the least expected things to be the most purposeful in my life. Definitely, I've found myself at the crossroads between things. And when one does, as we all do, one needs patience in so many ways. So, and a faith, like a deep faith in that our purpose will come to the fore by, as you said, being myself, I suppose.
This is Your Purposeful Life, and I'm your host, Adrian Starks. I'm a speaker, podcaster, narrator, writer, and entrepreneur. On this podcast, we're taking a different approach to the understanding of purpose because it's not a one-size-fits-all. There will be a variety of guests expressing their purpose through the human mess we call the human journey. These conversations will guide you to a better awareness and understanding of your unique purpose in the daily life of mistakes, changes, and challenges, and how to put that purpose into action, bringing you more experiences of success, fulfillment, and achievement on your terms. Let's go on this journey of purpose together. Welcome back, everyone, to Your Purposeful Life podcast with your host, Adrian Starks. And it is here where we're helping you shape your purpose your way. Today, I am so excited. We have a guest on, and his name is Mícheál O'Sullivan, to the podcast and community. Mícheál, how are you doing today, my friend?
Hello from Ireland, everybody. It is really wonderful to be here and to talk about the dangerous term purpose. Adrian, you're a very virtuous person to delve into such a precipice of a theme. It's very, very nice. And to those listening, God knows, where they are laying their energies right about now. Cleaning the house, being purposeful, of course, or maybe just staring into space.
Who knows? Who knows? You're right. It's such a deep topic. And speaking of topic, we're going to dive into the topic today of poetry and a deeper meaning in life. For our audience here today, of course, you're probably wondering who Mícheál is. And I'm going to explain that here just a little bit. We're going to give you all of the things about Mícheál, the reason why he's on the show today. Before we do that, make sure that you're all downloaded this podcast into your favorite podcast platform of choice. For our new listeners today, go to our website, yourpurposeful.life, join our YPL community, and join our YouTube channel where we'll have weekly videos coming out. And here's the thing, I'm not releasing any full videos on social media. To catch these full videos, you have to go to our YouTube channel, hit that subscription bell with a purpose so that you're notified, because there's a lot of great conversations going on in that community, even after the interviews. Now, back to the special guest of the hour, Mícheál O'Sullivan. There are so many things to say about him, but let's just say first that he attracted me because of who he is. And this is who he is. He's a renowned poet, singer, and speaker from Limerick, Ireland. His artistry identity lives on the threshold between things. He's a master of several works of music and poetical performances and compositions. His way in the world exists between laughter and poignancy. From a family steeped in Irish traditional music and academia, he gravitated to performance very early on. Beginning as a drummer, he studied music at University College Cork. He graduated to an MA in, I'm going to say this, ethnomusicology, say that 20 times in a row, at Irish World Academy of Music and Dance before teaching as a freelance music educator with, get this, a specialization in rap and human beatboxing, vocal percussions. Now that's pretty impressive there. Mícheál, welcome to the show, my friend. How you doing?
Thanks for the introduction, Adrian. Yes, I've found the least expected things to be the most purposeful in my life. Definitely, I've found myself at the crossroads between things. And when one does, as we all do, one needs patience in so many ways. So, and a faith, like a deep faith in that our purpose will come to the fore by, as you said, being myself, I suppose. Musically, my parents and me, I got into hip hop, and naturally, a lot of you parents out there will know that your children will prove themselves by running as far away from your interests as possible before returning with their tails between their legs to inherit the wisdom that you have curated for them over the years. So I got into hip hop early when I was in boarding school, the great global art form and cultural form of hip hop, and it held me for a long time until I became a singer. Really, after my drumming days, and I inherited a great store of songs from my mother, Noreen, who's a spiritual singer. So she sings medieval Latin Gregorian chant in a very Irish traditional way. Those ethnomusicologists out there will be raising their eyebrows right now. And I also got into a lot of church music, English language hymns, Irish traditional song. And so I came to that as an adult, really. So that's a whole thing. When one sees a person practice anything spiritual, musically or otherwise, or anything traditional, musically or otherwise, one presumes that one has been indoctrinated from an early age.
Right.
But I came to these ancient traditions as an adult. I really chose it, and in many ways, I often accredit my parents' separation to the inheritance of that music from my mother. Because, as many of your listeners know, when a relationship transforms, children and loved ones are able to forge an individual relationship with the two people who have cleaved from each other. And so I was spending a lot of time with my mom alone, and after dinner she would teach us some songs, some Latin Gregorian chant, very ostensibly very simple melodies like Kyrie eleison. And that repeats 9 times, 3 times for the Father, 3 times for the Son, and 3 times for the Holy Spirit, with little ornamentations and changes in its melody. So it's very meditative music, and coming at it after my beatboxing days was definitely a very restorative and a great blessing in my life. And so that sense of purpose really came to me as I decided to collect those songs and collect Irish traditional songs as much as I could, and curate a store of pre-existing but ancient music. And that then led me on, and that made me quite purposeful. Yeah, that led me quite purposeful. Now, in terms of my purpose at that time, though, I was teaching human beatbox and rap workshops in Irish schools.
Oh, okay. So before we get into that, I'm very interested to hear about that. So I want to. We're going to talk a little bit here about the background here, and I love how you said too that when two parents separate, that it can be tough, and this is part of the challenge too. I call it sometimes the human mess that we have in our lives that can bring some type of process to us that becomes a purpose. So with that, you gravitated towards your mom and the music, and that heavily influenced you. Now, you're from Ireland. You're from Limerick, Ireland. On the reference map here for the listeners today across the world, where is that located in Ireland? Whereabout?
Limerick is in the southwest of Ireland at the mouth of the River Shannon, which is the longest river in Ireland or England. A great, fine, proud river. And it kind of creates a spine of Ireland, the Shannon River. That's one of the reasons the Vikings and everybody were able to infiltrate it they went from the Atlantic Ocean onto the fresh water and were able to drag their boats up into the heart of Ireland. And it really was an information superhighway back in the day. So I'm still here beside the Shannon River right now. But Ireland, interestingly, is actually much more north than in its latitude than even the Irish realize. We're actually directly across from, in an American sense, Seattle. So Seattle and Ireland are on the same latitude.
I'm in Seattle.
So we're actually quite north. Oh, right, interesting. Yeah. So we're beside each other in a certain way, and another way, and so that's why it rains a lot. Of course, over there in Seattle, the rain sets in a lot because you don't have the sea wind as much, But here we're right out in the middle of the Atlantic, so we're very, very famous for the weather being very changeable in Ireland. Hence the rainbows, Irish rainbows. It's always moving and the sun is always coming through the clouds. So they say if you don't like the weather in Ireland, wait 5 minutes. That's what they say. And I suspect that this changeability has had an effect on our psyche and on our purpose in the world. We're a very changeable people.
Speaking of Ireland and being changeable, like you were saying, the resiliency, I would say, that you have of the adaptability to change. Like you were just saying earlier, if you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes. So you're never used to just one thing. And I think that comes across too as how you're influenced in your area of seeing changes and things evolve in short amounts of time, which gets us into the idea of having something to report about your environment, the poetry aspect of it. And I believe this is why your background is so huge in it. Believe it or not, when I was doing some research, Mícheál, I really thought about how poetry has impacted me in my life and how I grew up with poetry. But then I thought about, wait a minute, I want to ask you, what is good poetry? Because everyone, when they think of poetry, they think of rhyme and meter. They think of the basic, the soft, loving poems. But there are a lot of powerful poetical pieces out there that have shaped and moved the planet, literally. In your sense, in your experience as a specialist in this, what is good poetry?
It's a good question. There are many aspects you can come at poetry from. Yesterday only, I read a quote from Wallace Stevens, who's a great poet, and he said that poets are the priests of the invisible. And of course, in Ireland, the poetry was held as a very spiritual vocation, in a sense. It was exalted as a very specialist thing. And but being priests of the invisible is solidarity, in my view. I was thinking about this quote. And solidarity is poetry. Like music gets to it as well. And often I was and am exasperated with the music culture that we have. So many of our songs are sad, are breakup songs, and that's because there's great solidarity and invitation in them. And I find that good poetry is the same thing. It brings a person physically into an experience that we've all had, usually in private. So it can be a very confessional experience, but it's also very invitational at the same time. So it invites us to feel a physical feeling, a memory in a sense, to bring us to a place that and offer that solidarity that you're not the only one, do not be afraid, of course, is what I think good poetry inherently says. Of course, when the world of poetry, though, is, for me, very enigmatic. For many readers, it's so impenetrable because it doesn't seem to be about that much, a lot of it. A lot of it is irrelevant, it feels, at the beginning. And of course, then I come from a tradition where good poetry is almost descriptive and instructive. It's inward looking. It almost comes from a prayerful or interior sense of what it is to be alive. And I was thinking then about that being the priests of the invisible, that our own very existence is invisible. Of course, we see the world around us, but that feeling, we've never seen ourselves on a non-physical level. That feeling that we have, which is more than just the tendrils and the skin and bone and blood, that sense of purpose we have indeed is invisible. So poetry goes towards feeling that rocking boat on the sea of stars.
I like that.
Just tries to capture a moment. I suspect yesterday I came across, there's the most famous poet of the last century in Ireland is called Seamus Heaney, and he died now, must be a good almost 10 years ago. And yesterday I came across his haiku, And a haiku is a very famous Japanese short poetic form that, of course, the Japanese just got really, really into for a couple of millennium. I presume they still are into it. I hope so. Anyway, and I have it yesterday, and I remember my father very often. He died around 4 years ago. And this haiku is the 1st of January 1987 by Seamus Heaney. And it says, "Dangerous pavements, but I face the ice this year with my father's stick." Dangerous pavements, but I face the ice this year with my father's stick. So what does that imply? Of course, so many of us listening immediately imply that he has lost his father, that this is the first year he faces a winter without his father, or that he's constantly remembering his father. Maybe he lost his father many, many years ago, but this year he's found or has decided to take his father's stick. He is becoming his father. So you're trying to say things and bring people to a physical space. That moment when we're leaving the house and we see the ice and we remember our dead loved ones. It's a very ineffable, very challenging art form to try and capture something like that. And this sense of purpose that the poet has, I've come to learn, is that you're like a magpie. Your antennae are always out. So you're always looking for those little shards of meaning, those little lightning strikes of meaning, or when you see through the veil of the normal pragmatic life, and you have to have that faith in yourself that you are purposeful, or that you are worth expressing these very, very deep currents of interiority that we're all experiencing.
I love how you shared that poem with me or with us, that very short poem. And what is it called? Is it called a haiku?
A haiku, yes. Haiku.
Haiku. It was very short to the point. And actually, one of my questions for you today was, can poetry be therapeutic and healing? I think in that poem, it was a healing process for him to be able to write that and to acknowledge the fact that his loved one had passed, but that he's willing to carry on, and he's inspiring others down that slippery path that may be falling all over the place. And this is what I'm getting just all of a sudden, just from what you share with me, that there is hope for them if they find some type of purpose, that stick, that meaning to get them along. Yeah. Do you feel that poetry can help people find a new direction in life after a dramatic life change or experience?
I do, but in a counterintuitive way. It can instill patience. The act of reading a poem is the act of patience, really. You're doing something that's holding a mirror up to a mirror of what you're doing now. It's a refraction of time. It's a very complex art form. And I think one of the most valuable things poetry does for me is that it instills silence. It instills patience, and it instills solidarity. Don't worry. So that when we're going through something, there's that great phrase, if you're going through hell, keep going.
Don't look back.
Which is more of an old wives' tale. It's quite poetic, but I think it's not attributed to anybody in particular. But there is that sense in poetry. It's always spoken to me that there is a sense of heartbreak. For instance, Heaney as well was so focused on his own memories of childhood for a large part of his poetry, yet there's so much solidarity and identification in it for us as we grapple with finding our own purpose, that it's so beautiful to know that we're not supposed to know what's going on. So I was aware when I was coming on your Purpose podcast that really poetry is anti-purpose. It's got anti-purpose force within it, because we're so, in a sense, obsessed with it. Mm-hmm. Of course we are. Why wouldn't we be? We didn't ask to be here, and we don't know where we're going. So we're reading the words of each other, trying to go beyond the words to find something. So when your question about making change in life and reading poetry during that change, looking backward and getting a sense of time is a great power in poetry. I have a poem called Turas de Anam, and that's the Irish language, Turas de Anam. So Turas is a journey, and de Anam is of your soul. So Turas de Anam, journey of your soul. And it really talks about this patience and tries to diffuse a sense of purpose, if you will, or a sense of hindsight in real time. So if only, of course, we could have this sense of merciful hindsight on ourselves in real time, I often wonder. And I think that poetry does this. It gives us a sense of perspective and objectivity, but also allows us to identify and project with abandon. And Turas de Anam begins with oftentimes the step backward allows the soul catch up. Oftentimes the step backward allows the soul catch up, so that all our happy hindsights harmonize and wisdom builds. And share your luck, be miserly only with misfortune, for in each seismic shudder we learn to trust the ground again, humble again, knowingly broken, unrepentantly wounded, proud to bear pain. Laying claim to the joy factory of your body, no more tariffs or sanctions, wage cuts and glass ceilings, conventions expenses paid, nor lanyards and company position. This way, you can live in ways others simply will not. Develop sides of you others simply would not. So feel a rhythm beyond a beat, begin with a break, and allow your soul catch up.
Beautiful. This is why I feel poetry has a deep meaning. And I know you mentioned about it having sort of an anti-purpose. I actually think that poetry could have a purpose depending on where people are in their lives. There's a poem that I read called the Serenity Prayer. Well, it's more of a prayer, Serenity Prayer. I went over that poem over and over and over again in my head, and I was going through one of the most challenging moments in my life. It's probably over 13 years ago. And that poem saved me. I dissected that poem left and right. I looked at each phrase and I really questioned myself on it. And I really found my answer, not the poem's answer, but my answer, my purpose within that poem itself. And I find that it is quite therapeutic and healing for people. And what you said was beautiful. Someone's listening to this today and they're going to be healed by that. Also, what I love about what you're doing with poetry, I was on your Instagram and I saw that you recited a poem by, correct me if I'm wrong on this, he's considered to be the national poet of Ireland, W.B. Yeats, right? Am I saying the last name?
Yeah.
Yates.
Yeah, Yeats,
and this poem, I believe, was called Growing Old.
Yes, when you are old.
When you're old. Yeah. I probably watched that maybe 15 times.
Oh, great. Yeah.
And I was really inspired by that poem. And I thought to myself, hey, I want to talk to you about it. And what inspired you to bring that poem up on your social media channel?
Great, good question. Now, W.B. Yeats is he is the rock star, a ghost now. He died in the late or early 1900s. He was a very esoteric man, but also very pragmatic. From a moneyed background, he set up the Irish National Theatre, the Abbey Theatre, and on the side. But he was very much a full-time poet, and there's a great story about W.B. Yeats. He used to walk around talking to himself around Dublin City, and Dublin is quite small, so he was a big 6'5" man, and he'd walk around talking to himself a lot with his glasses. Very, very, very dotty man. And there's an arts club there on Merrion Square in Dublin, and he walked in there and he sat down and he had the 3-course meal that everyone had, and all the other artists were there, and everyone knew to gravitate towards him because he was a polymath, a great wise man, and he used to talk a lot. And he finished his dessert, and then they took his dessert plate, and then the waitress walked by and he says, "Oh, I don't know, have I eaten yet?" And his dinner guests or his dinner mates, as a joke, said, "Oh, no, you haven't, William Butler Yeats, you haven't eaten at all." And he goes, "Okay." And he had all 3 courses again. So wow. What that says about what that says about About him, I do not know. But they did say that his wisdom was not as sharp for the second sitting of dinner than it was for the first.
That is hilarious.
Which is a very strange story of W.B. Yeats. But when you are old, I first heard it recited by a friend of mine who's a great force of nature, a guy called Sean Flynn. And he just set about committing poems to memory, which is a great practice that all of us can do.
Okay.
Committing poems to memory, even the short little haiku, or anything, because it really is just about a matter of time. There's no secret that I have, unless some people listening will have a photographic memory. They know they can learn things and recite things. But even then, once you have that, there's a whole inner language of rhythm and intonation and intentionality in the poem that one can set their not so great skills possibly at. So I saw it live performed when I first decided to learn it. And Yeats uses rhythm in his poetry. He's much more, at that time, the poets were quite incantational and would use rhythms and rhyme and kind of set you up for a rhyme and then not give you the rhyme and then give you the rhyme in a second, kind of like early rap, really. They were very much rap stars at the time as well. They were kind of rock stars.
Yeah, they were rock stars of their time.
So, and when you were old, it goes like this by W.B. Yeats. When you are old and grey and full of sleep and nodding by the fire, take down this book and read and dream of the soft look your eyes once had and of their shadows deep. How many loved your moments of glad grace and loved you with love false or true, but one loved the pilgrim soul in you and loved the sorrows of your changing face. And so, bending down beside the glowing bars, murmur a little sadly how love fled and paced upon the mountains overhead and hid its face amid a cloud of stars.
Beautiful.
When you were old and grey and full of sleep and nodding by the fire, take down this book and read and dream of the soft look your eyes once had and of their shadows deep. How many loved your moments of glad grace and loved you with love false or true, but one loved the pilgrim soul in you and loved the sorrows of your changing face. And so, bending down beside the glowing bars, murmur a little sadly how love fled and paced upon the mountains overhead and hid its face amid a cloud of stars.
Wow. Beautiful. That's
and
powerful.
Yeats was in a lifelong unrequited relationship with a woman called Maud Gonne. He's very famously remembered. In Ireland, you see, they'll never remember you for the good things. They'll always remember you for the stuff you didn't want to be remembered for. But look at Bono, for instance. But Yeats, yes, he's very famous for offering his offer or asking for the hand of marriage from a certain lady 2 or 3 times, and
wow,
him getting turned down each time. So there is an honesty.
Yeah,
there is an honesty in his poetry.
I
and again,
like
Heaney and like all poetry as well, it's intensely personal. A lot of the writers out there, the great advice to writers is write what you know, because you can't get that visceral, authentic feeling if you don't write exactly what you know. How can you describe anything?
It's the truth,
that you
right?
haven't
Personal
experienced?
truth, right? That personal truth. You can't speak what you don't know because it comes across a certain way, and the feeling behind it. That poem itself is very powerful, and the fact that you have it memorized. And I like the exercise you told us to do for our listeners today. Find some poem or a poem that resonates with you. Start memorizing it. Start from the beginning. Maybe memorize a couple of sentences. Then go into a paragraph, and then just eventually you memorize the whole thing, and then start feeling it as you're saying it. And speaking of poems, you inspired me when I saw you recite that poem on Instagram, and I thought to myself, well, when I have Mícheál on the show, I need to let him know also who has inspired me through poems. And growing up, I was infatuated with poetry. Let's just start first with Greek poetry, Homer. Now, these are different types of poems for our listeners today. These are more of epic poems, story-based poems. But I was really inspired by how they wrote during that time. But if we go into actual poetry now, Maya Angelou was a big one for me. Langston Hughes, The Harlem Renaissance was very influential upon my writing in poetry. Robert Frost. Let's go with some poets: Rumi, Hafiz, Persian poets. We can go with let's see. Rudolph Kipling was a good poet. I loved his poem called "If," one of my favorites of
Yes,
all time. And
yes.
then I
Well, you
thought
should commit that one. That if you commit that one to memory, that's quite tricky.
that is quite tricky. But I also wanted to bring some also respect and tribute to your native country, because I thought about the poems I've read and I said, wait a minute. If I read a lot of poems, there has to be some other poets that are from Ireland that I didn't know they were from Ireland. And I did my research on this. And so, of course, W.B. Yeats came up. And there was Oscar Wilde, which he was controversial, but but overall, he was an amazing writer and had a lot of national acclaim for his works. There's James Joyce, Jonathan Swift, Thomas More. Those were the ones that I remember that I've read poems from. There's many other Irish poets, but these are the top of my list that I have come across before, but I didn't know that they were from Ireland. And I was like,
Great.
whoa.
You mentioned Thomas More there. Thomas More was a songwriter and a poet and a real rock star before the advent of recorded music. And when they sold sheets, so these sheets of manuscript would go out to every living room in Western Europe and England and Ireland. And he was a huge star. And when he would sing, women would faint. And quite a slight man. And
I didn't know that about him.
Yes, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. And Oscar Wilde, he was another great novelist and poet. And he's put a different type of poetry than the quip, the after dinner quotes that he has are so complex. My favorite was beginning. Oh yes, to love oneself is the beginning of a lifelong love affair.
Mm. Whoa.
So, to love oneself is the beginning of a lifelong love affair. I love the word "the beginning" there, because we all start from a space of not loving ourselves.
We do.
So the genius, both rhythmically, to love oneself is the beginning of a lifelong love affair. The word "beginning" there is rhythmically and intellectually just a stroke of genius.
It is. He had a quote too about, what was it? About where, I don't know why it's not ringing. Let me just check here quickly. I don't do this often, but I'm going to check on my phone here because I have to bring this quote up because it's a powerful
quote. The gutter
quote.
and the stars, possibly.
Yeah, it's a quote that he's very known for, but many people, when they quote it, they do not give him credit for it. And they'll just
that happens.
Yeah, yes. They'll put things up and they'll just put their picture up. And I'm like, that's not your quote. Stop it. Let's see here. Oscar Wilde.
The only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about.
Exactly. It's like pay homage to people and give them their respect. Let's see. Oh, where's this quote? There was some quote about. Okay, maybe I'm not finding it now. Oh, it's elusive. Something about not comparing yourself to people. There's only one you, or I don't know how he phrased. Oh yeah, here it is. Here it is. So simple. Be yourself. Good. Everyone else is already taken. Why was I not remembering that one?
Well, even the word already, like there was no need for him to put the word already in. So right. I don't know where he was quoted or where he first wrote them down, but it's very conscious what he's doing there.
Yeah. Sure. My favorite book that he did, was, what book was it? Oscar Wilde. The Picture of Dorian Gray. Now, a huge book. Once again, a lot of controversy behind it. He's before his time, and he revealed things that to this day people can see and accept and be like, yeah, that's what's bad about that. But during that time, we have to realize that was not talked about. That was like not to be said publicly, but he did it anyway, out of that part of himself that wanted to express. Now, speaking of expression, Mícheál, and all this wonderful poetry coming out of Ireland, why is Ireland synonymous with art, music, and creativity? I mean, we see these common themes happening with these great poets and even yourself. do you have a special thing that you're drinking there, or what's happening in Ireland that's bringing this creativity out?
Yeah, yeah. There's memory everywhere in Ireland, I think in some countries, newer countries like America, of course, this is all in our minds, but there's a sense of belonging and inheritance, ancestry that a lot of people in America think is missing. And of course, it is linearly, I suppose, empirically not written down or told us because it's a new country, like you were displaced geographically on some levels. But in Ireland, of course, you literally be going down the road looking at the ditch or the hedge, and then the hedge will part and you will see a huge forgotten monastery ruin in the middle of a church, in the middle of a field, and then it'll be gone again. You'll be on the way to the airport and you will see a huge ruined castle like right beside the highway that nobody owns, that was the seat of a serious bit of power back in the day. Anything from the 1100s on, really. So to be Irish is to be invaded, to be adaptable. I think you mentioned earlier, to change with the times. Like Dublin at the moment is they're calling it the European Silicon Valley because all of the European headquarters of all of the American companies are in Dublin. And that's very indicative to me of the new chapter, like Ireland was the seat of so much of the wisdom industry in terms of the monastic education that was held here throughout before and after the Dark Ages, they say. There was a breakdown in power in Europe, and Ireland was largely untouched. Ireland too, though, has a sense of ancestry and belonging, I suppose, because the Romans and the Greeks, they didn't get to Ireland. They came into England and then they built Hadrian's Wall, which is a huge wall up around Scotland to keep the Scots at bay. And they didn't come to Ireland because Ireland was full of oak forest. So there was just nothing but forest here. So the Roman steel wouldn't go very far and you'd get ambushed. And then it was a bit colder then. So it was a bit icy, and the Italians and Greeks didn't like that. So our social structures, our sense of culture was unbroken then as well. So that creativity is a safe place. So that history is being told. So there's a traumatic history, and those of us, a traumatic history can be used or needs creativity to vent it. There's a sense of exasperation. The Irish have a very dialectic or contradictory relationship with purpose, because you see all of these ruins and you hear of all the invasions and all of the dark chapters and revolutions in Ireland over the years, and you're wondering, should I really go and chain myself to a fence somewhere, or should I just wait it out and write some poems? So we took refuge in our music, and we've taken refuge in performance. I think we, as a people, we sing when we get together. Like when the music or the pubs close, people will start singing, and for us that's not unusual, but everyone has a song. So when my family get together, everyone sings the same song, just one song. But that means we can definitely keep the party going a little bit. And everyone has to do their song, or else we have to go home. So you have to do it. So some families have that, of course, in all over the world. But in Ireland, it's very normal for a musically inept family to start singing together. And that's very normal. So the poetry then is more... is not as strong in the last few years. We do love our poets, but there's not much recitation of poetry going on, really. And I would recommend your listeners to go on to YouTube or anywhere, really, and type in the famous poets reciting their own poetry, like W.B. Yeats reciting his poetry. It's quite performative and incantational. And that sense of performance in poetry has really kind of it's almost left in terms of its being a virtuosic art. I work a lot with a poet called David White, and he has had an extraordinary memory. David White is based in Seattle as well, and on Whidbey Island.
Okay,
and he's an extraordinary memory. And he recites all of his poetry, his poetry and other people's poetry, from memory.
Wow.
And immediately one is, and I often think of Thomas Moore when I'm witnessing David perform, because what he's doing is what people were doing in the 1800s, 1700s. They're reciting from memory. And in fact, the poet has been reciting from memory for thousands and thousands of years. And that in itself sends our primal brain, if you wish to call it that, for want of a better term, or our spiritual brain into a deep reverie. When someone isn't reading, when someone isn't looking down, when someone has their chin up for a certain amount of time, parts of our brain begin to trust this person a lot, which is why teleprompters have gone through technological revolutions since politicians have come into being.
I'm glad you brought that one up, the teleprompters, because there's a lot of people out there. Let's just be honest here. They are not memorizing anything. They're reading from teleprompter. No. We're not talking about poets. We're talking about some people on TV, and we know they're not saying that directly from their head or their heart. This is coming from a teleprompter. And this is what separates what you're doing.
It does. Well, it doesn't separate because our primal mind, for want of a better term, I've only come up with that term now for some reason, but our innocent mind is fooled, and we're happy to be fooled. We're thinking that the newscaster is telling us something off the top of off their chest, off the cuff, but it works, So that's how powerful it is. So when you're in a room with someone and they're speaking from memory or not from or intuitively, but not from a page or a script, something happens in the room biochemically, I think. And that begins to create a sense of listening that is just unrivaled. It's story time around the fire. It's that very ancient feeling. And one feels purpose when one is listening on that level.
Absolutely.
When one is being spoken to intentionally. And again, committing things to memory it seems like an easy trick, but it's very intentional. You have to do it. You have to imagine and manifest. You have to keep imagining that you will create a safe space for someone by doing this. That's the incentive that I use when I commit to memory. And I experience resistance. I was listening to the great writer Stephen Pressfield, I think his name's Stephen.
Yeah, Stephen Pressfield. He has a couple of books out.
Talks a lot about resistance and why we don't sit down and write every day. It's because we're coming up against a very stubborn part of ourselves that just wants to reach out and clean the house or scroll on the phone.
He's a book called The War of Art.
Change your life.
Is that his book called The War of Art? The War of Art. Yeah, that's a good one. That talks about the creativity a lot, right?
An amazing man. Yeah, and he talks about his own struggle with sitting down to meet the muse. Mm-hmm. So that faith in oneself, faith in the worth of oneself, that's all inner work that we can do. And for myself, I was a musician and I was a songwriter, and I tried the music industry thing. When you try to be purposeful as a young musician, you go to the music industry and you get stuck in, and quickly realized that even if people did want to buy my songs, which they didn't, thankfully, that they wouldn't probably have any money to do it anyway. Because at that time, I'm 38 years old. At that time, the streaming services were coming on, and even though we had good representation, there was just no way forward. So that felt and stung like a failure in my life in my mid-20s into my late 20s, when I had to let go of that dream. Mm-hmm. And I was really, really good at performing. I was really good at being on stage, and I was very, very funny.
Well, let's talk about your performance. So let's go with that, because let's not. I know you're being humble, but I'm going to go ahead and let the audience know today that you share the stages with many great people like Russell Crowe, Alan Doyle, Steven Spielberg, Scott Grimes, Sting. There's so many big names that came up, and I was going to bring this up too. And I'm like, well, great, let's talk about that, because having that experience, having this connection with stardom, and then this didn't work out. But now this purpose that you've created for yourself is something that you're a part of, that you feel very connected to. For a person listening today, that dream may not happen, or something within the dream may put you into a different path. Yes. What do they do I mean, when they have, was that a moment where the door closed, or you were just sitting down saying, this here is fun, but this is not for me. I need to have this over here.
Yes. And it was that, but also a realization of how much work that those people do to get to where they are.
Mm-hmm.
So they did get lucky in a sense, but they're so prolific.
Yeah.
Sting still goes to the studio. So now we just performed with him once in New York. I did some beatbox for Every Step You Take, and at a concert there with Russell Crowe, and met him after.
That's
and
awesome.
It was amazing.
Could you do that today? Could you show us a little bit of? I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot
Sure.
here, but
Yeah,
earlier you were
sure.
talking about beatboxing, and I kindly took that conversation to a different direction. I wanted to get back to that, so I haven't forgot about it. My listeners are probably like, "Man, Adrian, you didn't even get back to that."
I'll teach the listeners something. I'll teach if you're still listening. We've gotten through all the philosophical stuff.
We had to. That was a topic.
We're going to teach you. Going to teach you like a somatic breathing exercise. It's called human beatboxing, and it's easy because the classic mnemonic of beatboxing is boots and cats. Right, boots and cats and cats and cats and boots and cats. But I have another mnemonic, which is a puffsy cats, which is basically just putting an F on your kick drum. So if you put an F on every single one of them, that then joins your hi-hat, which is so now you got so that's good. Puffsy,
okay.
and then cats. Now your cats, this is going to blow your mind, listeners, because your cats is actually, this is where the breathing, the ventriloquism of it comes in. So listen and see if you can tell what I'm doing.
Oh, okay.
So what I'm doing there is your cats, your is as it sounds, but your is actually an inhale breath, both sides of the back of your tongue, with a bit of attack, as they say. So you're actually creating this kind of circular breath, which is all outward, and which is both two inhale breaths. And at the end there, I put in like an echo. So all I did was breathe in 11 times in a row. Now, all of your life, you've been told not to breathe in 11 times in a row. So at first it can be really, really, it's a complete inverse of how one is supposed to. In fact, we're supposed to hide our inhaled breath completely at all points in the day and night. Snoring is very out of fashion. Breathing through the mouth is even out of fashion these days. And so in a sense that creates a breath. And of course I love to sing then. I love Bobby McFerrin. So and then, I see trees of green. So I would go around Ireland, the highways and byways of Ireland, and I would teach these kids this circular breathing technique and talk to them about like how breathing can help with anxiety and how hip hop is not all gangster rap. It's actually originally was for kids who dropped out of school to teach them about love and, ways outside of violence, and for them to be in a system where they can prove themselves to each other, battle each other, if you will, with their wits,
without the violence.
Dance.
Without the violence. And I like how you said it wasn't, hip hop was never gangster rap. What people are hearing today and what they've heard before, this violence perspective, that's just not where it was ever at. It was a means of expression, a means of sharing one's life story. Like you were saying, back to the poetry again. We talk about these wonderful poets. They were the rappers of their time, and they set the stage, because rapping is, I wouldn't call all rapping poetry, because honestly, not talking about Ireland rap, I'm talking about rap here in the States. There's some rap that is just, it's garbage. I mean, but
for sure.
There's some good artists out there.
I went to see Kendrick Lamar there in Ireland a couple of weeks ago, and it was
he's a genius. He's great.
Yeah,
he's absolutely wonderful. There's other artists that I really have been inspired by, But this idea of rapping and helping kids, it's another way which you're bringing meaning to life, Mícheál, because it's something that this whole segment was about: poetry, the deeper meaning of life, finding a new direction. And what you discovered, even in being on these stages, and you're still doing this today, you're speaking, you're helping people, you're teaching, but your experience of what you learned growing up with your mother, from also being impacted by your environment, and to now, this is the direction of life you've taken with a purpose. And this is why you're powerful in what you do, and why I consider you a very authentic artist and teacher, poet. For the listeners today that have listened to this conversation, the history of poetry, what it looks like, what is good poetry, how can it impact our lives, help us do certain things, memorization of it. We talked about music a little bit, beatboxing, and how all these things place factors into anxiety. How can one access the artistic part of themselves?
I think it's the artistic process for me is a dance between a kind of an egotism and also then a humility. So an extreme egotism, but also then a kind of a humility. Now the humility makes you wait and makes you not create the art or the creativity, because you have to be, I don't think I'm good enough. But then once you do create something, you have to recognize if it's good or not. So people suffer from both extremes in opposite ways. Some people will have loads of humility and not enough narcissism or confidence. So in a sense, there's a mania in it, and you just have to recognize your own mania. I really want to write a second book, but it's not happening as fast as I want. So I have to just go with that. I'm not in control of that. So, but I'm humble. Yeah, I'm humble enough to wait, and I'm not going to force it. So in that, but you have to create the environment for it. So I'm constantly opening my Word documents and my notebooks, but I may not write in them. And a side of me is giving myself, berating myself for not every day. But I suppose to access that creative side of me allowed or makes me realize every single day that we're all the same. In Ireland, we have a saying called Mícheál féin, scéal gach duine. Mícheál féin, scéal gach duine. My story is everyone's story. My story is everybody's story.
Wow.
So we're all the same. So that is neither egotistical nor overly humble. That's just a fact. It's very, very difficult to fully realize that, because some people look so perfect and some people look so far gone that you don't identify with either of them. But we're all holding these disparate identities together in a very, very badly held fist. So realizing that is an everyday thing, and that's what creativity is for me. And then one sees the worth in what they're doing, or one finds the theme where they are comfortable writing. For instance, one of the flagship, I have one collection of poetry at the moment, and I'm writing a second one. And one flagship moment in that first collection is a poem called What to Hand On. And it simply opens with, it's very much in the style of Emily Dickinson, I hope. At least it goes out to her.
Yeah.
And it starts with just a simple line: I would wish to grow wise. I would wish to grow wise through gears of existence, to read the gradient in each phase of life, just to coast down the slopes beyond travailing times, to wear the right hat for the right company, and rhythm of each interaction, chiming in from the periphery to read the grain of every conversation, to fall in love in the prime of life, seeds sown of deathbed smiles, and waves of well-being lap at low tide, imploring your reluctant side to break even one cycle learned as a child, for wisdom knows what to hand on and what to hold and what to hand on, which to give and what to keep, where to dig and what to bury, when to wake and how to sleep. Our wish for wisdom, still a whisper, the source of which still buried deep. So, soul brother and soul sister, are we changed by what we meet?
Wow.
to know the right hat for the right company, and rhythm of each interaction, chiming in from the periphery to read the grain of every conversation. That's supposed to be a joke, by the way. It's impossible. Chiming in from the periphery to read the grain of every conversation, to fall in love in the prime of life. I don't mean youth. I mean to fall in love in the prime of life. Seeds sown of deathbed smiles. That's the game. Seeds sown of deathbed smiles. Waves of well-being lap at low tide, imploring your reluctant sight to break even one cycle learned as a child, for wisdom knows what to hold and what to hand on, which to give and what to keep, where to dig and what to bury, when to wake and how to sleep. Our wish for wisdom still, a whisper the source of which still buried deep. So, soul brother and soul sister, are we changed by what we meet?
Wow. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful poetry there. And I can hear the Emily Dickinson in it. She has a poem. One of my favorite ones was called Trees. And she depicts the relationship with trees and us and how we communicate. But listening to your poem, I can get remnants of Emily throughout. So you definitely nailed it there. Mícheál, this has been
I must go and look up Trees. Yeah. Before we go, I would like to tell your listeners that me and my brother and my mother run a tour to Ireland every summer for 2 separate weeks, one in early summer and one in late summer.
I was just going to ask you that. Yeah. For our listeners, how can they, what upcoming projects and events do you have coming up that they can
The annual one is that tour, and we love to make friends and let people know more about that. It's a 7-day tour in Ireland, and every morning we look into poetry and music and mythology, and every day we go out on the land and take a little bit of a walk. But I also offer online singing lessons called Songs of Life sessions, where I pass on these sacred songs, the jazz songs, the Irish trad songs, anywhere we want to go, really, and work with people of all ages and abilities, which is really great. I love teaching song. And most recently, I'm doing a series of sessions called The Poetic Process, which looks at famous poems and then poems of my own from my collection, Early Music, as a foundation to look into techniques and signposts around that. And then work with our own poetry. I try to incite poetry in other people. So INCITE, not INSIGH.
How do they go and find out about this? Where can they go?
I've got a website that I share with my brother and my mom called Turasdanam, 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 turasdanam.com.
I will make sure to put that definitely into the show notes of this podcast. They can just click on that link and go straight there, and then they can be updated on all the events that you have coming up. And I'm excited for the journey that you're on, the journey you continue to go on, Mícheál, and what you're expressing here through the art of music, poetry, singing, and this idea of expressing ourselves. One last question I have for all my guests here that I want to end the show out on today is, what does living a purposeful life mean to you?
More waiting than doing. Doing nothing is a very, very wise thing to do. Yeah. That takes a lot of courage. But you'll know when you've waited too long, so don't wait too long. You won't know either way, so you may as well wait first. That's what I think.
Wow. That's a different one for me. Waiting. And is there meaning behind that? Because you mentioned earlier today in this podcast segment that a lot of times being still, being silent, and not doing anything, that's where a lot of the answers come up for you. And I know exactly the art of waiting is not easy, everybody. And Mícheál is not saying, oh, just sit around every day waiting for the rainbow to show in the sky for you to give you a sign. But what he's saying, basically, and you know this, he's been dropping gems all throughout this episode. The art of paying attention to things, waiting but looking, observing, listening. And
there's a purpose in forgiveness as well. Self-forgiveness is a great purpose of life, and it's a constant too. So we can always run back to that one.
Love it.
If you're feeling particularly purposeless, one can return to a bit of self-forgiveness. Mercy
for yourself. I love that. Mícheál, this has been a wonderful time to have you on the show today, and I'm excited for what you're bringing across the world. Thank you for being on the show.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to Your Purposeful Life today, and I'm your host, Adrian Starks. Download this podcast on any platform of your choice by going to our website, yourpurposeful.life. Join me on my social media channels and be a part of the Your Purposeful Life community. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit that like button with a purpose. Let's help you shape your purpose your way.